and welcome to Neighbor. I'm your host for today, Daniel Kasnitz, and we're very pleased to have with us Ms. Barbara Hansson, who is the minister at All Souls Church. Thank you so much for being with us, Barbara.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh yeah, welcome to the show. Let's start in. Where did you come from, and how did you wind up in Brattleboro?
Well, that's a really big question. Where did I come from, and how did I end up in Brattleboro? Immediately before coming to Brattleboro, I was not that far away. I was in Plattsburgh, New York. Of course, originally, I come from Sweden, and that's a little bit further away.
It's a bit of a hike.
Yes, it is. But, you know, coming from Sweden and ending up in Brattleboro, Vermont, is a really good way to go. I find myself feeling very much at home here in Brattleboro, politically, culturally, and religiously as well. The climate is almost exactly like what I grew up with in Sweden.
Wow.
So,
which part of Sweden did you grow up in?
I was born and raised just north of Stockholm in what back then used to be the northernmost suburbs of Stockholm, which meant very rural suburbs. We actually lived in a apartment complex across from a farm, a dairy farm. And I remember walking from our apartment building across the street to the farm to get fresh milk in our milk pail.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was that in any way similar to how Brattleboro is developed now, that suburb from your youth?
Brattleboro is much bigger than the suburb I lived in back then. Currently, it may be similar in size, but back then it was more like almost Newfane.
Okay, that makes sense.
Except there were apartment buildings. The apartment buildings were the focus of the community, really.
Now, Sweden to Brattleboro is a jump, and the way most of the folks in the community have met you is most likely through your work at All Souls Church as the minister of the Unitarian Universalist congregation there. How did you make that journey? What got you interested in Unitarian Universalism in particular, and then being a minister in specific?
Well, it's a long and winding road that brought me here to Brattleboro from Sweden. I left Sweden in 1973, at the time, just for vacation. I was heading to Greece. It was the month of May, and I was going to Greece for the sun and warm water and for the simple relaxation and beauty of it. And I was planning to spend a whole month there with a friend. On the way to the Greek island of Hydra, I bumped into an American. He was stationed in the army, but that particular weekend he was on his way on a weekend adventure. He was not in uniform, so I had no clue. He and I struck up a conversation, and one thing led to another, and I got to know him really well during my stay in Greece. And when I returned to Sweden to work again, I realized that I had fallen in love and that I wanted for that to have a chance. And so I went back down. I actually quit my job and went back down to Greece to check the relationship out. And it's probably maybe not every parent's nightmare, but nearly every parent's nightmare to have a young daughter go off like that without any sort of safety net except a return ticket home.
Right.
I got married a few months later and came over to this country that way. And first arrived in Virginia. The man I married, Mark was his name, he extended his tour of duty. It was by then 1974,
Okay.
and the energy crisis had erupted here in this country, and I think the economic situation was very depressing. So he re-upped his tour, and he was stationed outside of Washington at first, with his mother living in Charlottesville. Charlottesville, Virginia became our sort of home base, more or less. Then we went off to New York City, where he finished his tour of duty. He did altogether 8 years in the Army. And our daughter was born there, Karen. And when he was discharged, we ended up moving back to Virginia to be nearer his family, to the Shenandoah Valley, where things were very conducive for a young family to raise a child. That was in 1978. We moved back there. Now, Mark was the one who introduced me to Unitarian Universalism. In Sweden, I had never heard of that faith tradition. By virtue of being born in Sweden to Swedish parents, I was a Swedish Lutheran, member of the church by birth, and baptized as an infant. I did what pretty much 99% of young people did back then in Sweden. I went to catechism classes and was confirmed probably age 13 or 14. But all that time, and especially as I entered into my teen years, I started asking questions, and I wondered a lot about religion, about different faith traditions, and I was encouraged, not in the Swedish church, but in school. The curriculum included, in public school, the curriculum included religion, survey classes in religion. So we studied Christianity, Protestantism, Catholicism, we studied Judaism, we learned about Buddhism and Hinduism, and my curiosity was piqued all through those different classes. By the time I was 17 or 18 years old, I considered actually leaving the Swedish church. But when I was told that that would mean, in the eyes of the Swedish church, that I was an atheist, I said, well, I'm not an atheist. It's just that I have a different beliefs than what the Swedish Lutheran Church proposes. So I never followed through with leaving the church. But I was seeking. I was definitely seeking and wanting very much some sort of connection that was more inclusive than the creed of the church allowed for. When I met Mark in Greece, he shared his background with me, and he had been a member of a Unitarian youth group in Greenfield, Massachusetts.
Wow.
Just down the road.
Fascinating.
And he started explaining some of the values and philosophies and theologies within Unitarian Universalism. And I thought, oh, that's what I've been all along without knowing. And the best way I can describe it for me personally was that all of a sudden it was as if the windows of the world opened up for me. I could find the sort of ideas and thoughts that I had had and feel like, yes, this fits. I'm not so strange.
Well, you felt an
after
acceptance,
all.
it sounds like.
I felt very much at home all of a sudden. And then when we settled down in Virginia, we both became members of a Unitarian Universalist congregation there and raised our daughter in that congregation with the religious education classes that they offered. She participated in. And I just ended up getting more and more involved with church life. It just seemed like it was a magnet to my way of being. The more involved I got in church life, the more whole I felt. The more I felt like myself, like the person I wanted to be.
Now, at that time, did you feel an inkling that you would be called to the ministry yourself?
No. I had no such ideas, except maybe in terms of a fantasy. But at that point, I did not yet have a college education. I had only finished 9 years of schooling in Sweden. That was all that was required. And I was not a happy student in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade in Sweden. So when I graduated from what was considered Swedish high school, 9th grade, I went to work. I did not go on to the next level.
So when and how did it evolve that you decided to take the ministry seriously and actually become a minister in the UU faith?
That, small increments all along, really. Being an immigrant affected what I thought I could do, what I could not do. I came to the United States in 1974, and I had married into a family of educators. I didn't realize that when I married, but that became very clear as I got to know my new family. And they were very supportive of me continuing my education. So once I began to feel more at home in this new culture, I looked into the community college where we lived and enrolled in an associate's degree program. When I finished that, I transferred to Mary Baldwin College to get the full bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And I did it at Mary Baldwin College because they had an adult degree program specifically for people like me, people with a working life and family life. And all along the way, taking classes at the community college and then at Mary Baldwin College, my confidence built and my ability to be fluent in my new culture and with my new language increased. And I became more and more involved with church life. Beyond the congregation, I got involved with the region of congregations.
Okay.
And eventually I was elected to serve as president of the geographical district where I lived.
And now, where that level of responsibility might have driven other people running, obviously, from that, you escalated your involvement still further.
I thrived on it.
Right.
And by this time, my husband Mark and I had actually separated. So we had divorced. I was a single mother, working full time, and doing volunteer work with church life on a part-time basis. And I loved it. It was it was just what gave me life and purpose to balance all three. So moving forward to 1993.
Okay.
I had just completed my first year of a 2-year term as district president of the Thomas Jefferson District, which is sort of the Mid-South of the East. And we were hosting the big national convention of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it happened to be the same year that we celebrated the 250th birth of Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
And the district I served was named after Thomas Jefferson. So we were quite proud of this. And when I arrived at the convention, I had a role in welcoming everybody to Charlotte, and that was going to be sort of the main contribution that I had. After that, I was just another delegate participant. But that was my moment in the starlight, we thought. What happened was an event had been planned for later during the convention to celebrate the birthday of Thomas Jefferson. And it was advertised, promoted as a birthday ball. And people were invited to come dressed in period costume. Many people didn't think much of that. Actually, many people thought that sounded exciting. Who doesn't want to have an opportunity to dress up?
Right.
But Unitarian Universalism has a membership that includes African American people and black people who aren't necessarily African American. And many of them actually were quite offended by the invitation. and by the idea that we were going to celebrate someone who, first of all, had not been Unitarian,
Right.
and second, was a slave owner. So, to say the least, all hell broke out.
Yes, I can
And-
understand that coming dressed in period would require a radically different costume depending on your
Yes.
background.
Yes, yes. And we were made aware of that.
Right, some of the costumes none too flattering.
Right. So, when all hell broke out at the opening plenary session,
Right.
I was just one of the many delegates. But because I served as district president, I felt a sense of responsibility, even though I really had nothing to do with any of the planning at all. I still felt, you know, I'm in a leadership role.
That makes sense.
So I ended up being in a group of 13 people who were charged by our moderator and denominational president to have a deeper conversation about what had happened and try to find some sort of solution or recommendation to bring to all the participants, all the delegates. And we were given an hour to do that. So we actually had one of the deepest conversations I have ever had. We stood in a circle in a room that might have been 12 by 12 in size. We were quite close. We held hands through most of that meeting. We shared tears and we shared laughter. We shared our pain and hurt and our hopes and aspirations and our vision. And our vision was that we're not here to place blame or to point fingers at anyone for doing wrong. We're here to lift up the opportunity to learn from our common mistake, our shared mistake, and to become better people in this process, to become more understanding and respectful. And everybody looked at me when our time was up and said, "We'd like for you to be the first one to speak." And I swallowed hard and said no. And they kept looking at me and saying yes.
And you were drafted, evidently.
And I said, well, okay, I'll do it if my partner, who served also in the Thomas Jefferson district, could stand with me and we would hold hands. We stand together. His name was Leon, and he was a black man. And I wanted for us to stand together for the impact that that would make. I was the first one to speak, and Leon spoke next. And the whole time we stood together. While I was speaking, there were 3,000 some people in the audience. And as I was speaking, I felt like something greater than me was speaking through me. And that's when I received my call to ministry. That's when I felt, oh yes.
Well, now from that experience, bringing that to Brattleboro and your ministry at All Souls Church, can you describe a little bit for our viewers how the role you feel All Souls plays in the community, and any special projects in particular that you and or All Souls Church might be involved with at this time.
Well, when I came to All Souls Church 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, I came with a portfolio that was probably strongest on the pastoral side, providing a pastoral ministry. And that was very much needed at that point, with All Souls Church having had a very traumatic experience. I am a good listener, and I provided a lot of opportunities for people to speak to me about their experiences and provide some guidance in the healing that needed to take place. As we have journeyed together now for 8.5 years, my emphasis has by nature shifted, because I've gotten involved with the community, primarily through the Interfaith Clergy Association.
Okay. Is that based in Brattleboro?
Yes,
okay.
it is. It's the Brattleboro Area Interfaith Clergy Association, a fantastic group that includes the Catholic priest, the major Protestant denominations, the Jewish rabbi, the Muslim community, Buddhist group, the Baha'i community, and of course Unitarian Universalist. We meet monthly, except during the summer when we take a break. And we provide services and programs throughout the year that foster interfaith conversations and relationships, and events that provide ministry in the community. The major effort that we have been involved with during the last couple of years has been around the Brattleboro area winter emergency overflow shelter.
Okay.
2 years ago, we took on the responsibility of making sure that all of the guests at the overflow shelter receive an evening meal,
Okay.
so that they can sleep
Right. And is that
peacefully at
responsibility shared amongst the different congregations involved?
night. Yes. I volunteered as the coordinator of the meals, and all the congregations, all the faith communities participate in some way with providing meals.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Barbara.
Thank you, Daniel.
It's been a pleasure having you here. You folks, you've been watching Neighbor to Neighbor. I'm your host for today, Daniel Kasnitz, sitting in for Lynn Coram. Our guest has been Barbara Hansson, the minister at All Souls Church in West Brattleboro. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.